I'm really pleased to be joined today by Mouin Rabbani, who is a political analyst and the co-editor of Jadaliyya. Hi, Mouin.
Hi, very nice to be with you.
I first just want to start out by asking you, why has this particular ceasefire gone into effect now?
In a word, because the United States ordered Israel to engage in a ceasefire agreement. It really is that simple. The key development was the Israeli bombing of the Qatari capital, Doha, in which Israel attempted to assassinate the Palestinian negotiating team that had convened to discuss a ceasefire proposal. That failed, but that also made clear to the Arab states that the continuing regional expansion of Israel's war is forming a direct threat to their national security and to their sovereignty. And they then began to seek to persuade Trump to use their leverage to bring this to an end. He listened, and in short, that's how we got where we are today.
There was, of course, a week-long ceasefire in November 2023 that saw more than 100 Israelis and hundreds of Palestinians released. There was another one in January 2025 that lasted for almost 2 months, and then Israel unilaterally broke it. Do you think that this time will be any different? Are you more optimistic for whatever reason?
This time could be different. On the one hand, it may well play out exactly the same. Israel retrieves its captives and with U.S. consent resumes and perhaps even intensifies its genocidal military campaign. But there's also another possibility that in this case, we have a number of regional powers pushing for it to be implemented. The U.S. seems to be invested in keeping the agreement afloat. Trump is personally involved in doing so. And so it's quite possible we will have a prolonged ceasefire. But I need to make very clear, a prolonged Israeli ceasefire, which, as we've seen in Lebanon, means the Palestinians cease while Israel continues to fire. Having failed to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip, Israel may find this the best alternative available because it can then obstruct reconstruction. It can ensure misery for the Palestinian population of the Gaza Strip. It can continue deepening its annexation of the West Bank and use that to seek to unilaterally resolve the question of Palestine on its own terms with U.S. and Western consent and functionally regional acquiescence.
So this agreement should see all Israeli captives, living and dead, released by Hamas. We've already seen the live ones released earlier this morning. But it doesn't result in a full withdrawal from Gaza. It has no specifications on reconstruction, and it does not even include the full release of Palestinian captives. So with that in mind, do you think that Hamas has given up its leverage here?
Well, it depends how you look at it. Many people have consistently been saying that the Israeli captives being held in the Gaza Strip form the only leverage Hamas has over Israel. I disagree. I think the captives are only leverage to the extent that they assist the Palestinians in freeing Palestinian captives being held by Israel. Other than that, they're basically serving as a pretext for genocide. Now, if you look at the agreement that was reached, at the beginning, Hamas gave Israel two options: either all Palestinian captives in exchange for all Israeli captives, or a phased exchange that would result in the same. Clearly, Hamas has achieved neither of these. It only got a partial release of Palestinian captives in exchange for all remaining Israeli captives, dead and alive. The second point, which you know, is that Israeli forces currently remain in direct occupation of about half of the Gaza Strip. And this clearly gives them enormous leverage over the Gaza Strip, particularly over reconstruction, the reestablishment of a semblance of normal life, and so on. I think we have to understand Israel is a nuclear-armed regional superpower supported by the most powerful states in history. And Hamas is essentially a second-order militia. And for 2 years straight, Israel has been conducting ceaseless genocide within a postage stamp sized territory. So I don't think anyone ever expected, that Hamas was going to emerge from this with a clear military victory. What they have succeeded in doing is to put the question of Palestine back at the very center of global attention, where it had all but been forgotten on October 6th. But if you look at it kind of in terms of pluses and minuses, what Hamas has agreed to so far clearly falls well below Palestinian hopes and aspirations and expectations. I mean, there's no two ways about that.
A lot remains to be seen about how this will play out, but thus far, there's already talk about this being Trump's legacy. So I want to ask you, how much credit do you give here to Trump for brokering this, and how do you compare this to the efforts of the Biden administration to bring about a ceasefire, or the lack thereof?
Well, I think the first question is credit for what? Is it credit for achieving a ceasefire? Absolutely. We now have a ceasefire because at long last, the United States ordered Israel to accept a ceasefire. Since February, Washington, under Trump, has given Israel unconditional support, has extended it total impunity to continue with and even to intensify the Gaza genocide and to engineer a famine among the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. But we now have a ceasefire because of Trump. And I think we should be clear about that. Compared to his predecessor, Joe Biden, well, Biden never made any effort to impose any restrictions of any sort on Israel. I think we have to recognize Biden is an ideological fanatic. Biden has Zionism in the very marrow of his bones. Trump, by contrast, couldn't give a hoot for Israel, the Palestinians, or anyone else. He acts purely on the basis of what he considers his own best personal interest. Unfortunately, for most of the past year, he has considered it in his best interest to unconditionally support Israel's intensification of the Gaza genocide. He has achieved the ceasefire, but it would be absolutely wrong to in any way describe this as a peace agreement or as a peace plan even. This is not a peace plan. It doesn't lay out clear political objectives, nor mechanisms or a time frame for achieving them.
This 20-point Trump plan also includes things like Palestinians losing more sovereignty by being put under the control of former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, although today on Air Force One he seemed to kind of backtrack on this and say it depends on his popularity there. But it also includes having the population forcibly de-radicalized and Hamas giving up its weapons. Is any of this actually going to happen, in your opinion?
I think it's dead in the water. I mean, what could be more obscene than going to the victims of genocide and saying it is you and not the society that perpetrated the genocide, the society that overwhelmingly supported the genocide that needs to be de-radicalized. More importantly, how can you have, what is called de-radicalization in a situation where Israel's policies towards the Palestinians not only ensure, but in fact demand militancy? Palestinians, and Hamas specifically, has made clear that it is not going to surrender its weapons except to the security forces of an independent Palestinian state. In other words, it has taken the position that if you want to remove our weapons, you first have to remove our motives for keeping them, and unless and until you do, we are not surrendering our weapons. Regarding governance, most Palestinian factions have made clear that they categorically reject this proposal that would install Tony Blair as a kind of colonial viceroy in the Gaza Strip. I mean, of all people to choose for this task, they actually went and found the full partner in the illegal invasion and occupation and destruction of a key Arab state, Iraq. And now he's supposed to play a positive role in the Gaza Strip. It's pure nonsense. But more importantly, the Palestinians have taken the position that the governance of the Gaza Strip is a matter for Palestinians and Palestinians alone to decide.
Yeah. Israel, of course, remains the occupying power of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So, what obligations does it actually still have to Gaza at this moment, and particularly in this post-genocidal phase?
Well, the most important obligation Israel has under international law is to leave, and to leave as rapidly as possible. In July of 2024, we had an important ruling from the International Court of Justice that determined that Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is illegal and must come to an end as rapidly as possible. And that was not just an obligation for Israel, it's actually an obligation for the entire international community to ensure that this occupation ends, but just as importantly, to do nothing that enables the occupation to continue, with specific respect to the Gaza Strip. When Israel unilaterally disengaged from that territory in 2005, the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is the guardian of the Fourth Geneva Convention, determined that Israel remains the occupying power because it continued to control the borders, the maritime borders, the airspace, the electromagnetic sphere, and so on. And as a result of that, Israel maintains key obligations as an occupying power. It is, in fact, responsible for the welfare of the occupied Palestinian population. It has all kinds of obligations that it basically honors now exclusively in the breach.
Israel's standing around the world right now, at least when it comes to popular opinion, seems to be weaker and lower than ever. But in your opinion, as it stands, as it exists as the Zionist state, is it at its weakest ever right now?
It is certainly isolated in a way that it hasn't been since the 1970s. And I think this is going to have a profound and a lasting impact on the overall situation in the Middle East. The problem here is that Israel has irreversibly lost the global town square. What people have seen and heard and experienced during the past 2 years has irreversibly damaged Israel's image in global public opinion. And this is a key factor because Israel is highly reliant on public support, because it basically lives by the grace of its Western sponsors and allies. We're seeing an increased schism between the policies of Western governments on the one hand and the views of their voters on the other hand. But we are beginning to see public preferences, very slowly I should add, begin to influence government policy. For example, the recent spate of recognitions of the state of Palestine by Western governments. Yes, these are symbolic measures that change nothing on the ground. But what is important to understand about them is that these measures were taken by their governments in response to public pressure and in the hope of demobilizing public campaigns for Palestinian rights. Western governments have on occasion previously adopted positions in support of Palestinian rights, but typically they have done this in order to strengthen relations with Arab states or out of exasperation with Israeli conduct and so on. But this is the first time since the emergence of the Zionist movement in the late 19th century that they have done so as a direct result from public pressure from their own citizens, from their own voters. And that is, I think, a very hopeful sign.
That's pretty huge.
Yes, it is, because, and if you look at the absolutely hysterical reaction of Israel and its supporters and its apologists, it is not because they see recognition as such as a mortal threat. They're now extremely worried about what comes next. If the Middle East policies of Western governments are now going to be influenced by the demands of their voters, of their constituents, what are they going to do next? Are they going to impose arms embargoes? Are they going to impose trade embargoes? Are they going to be serious about meeting their obligations under the Rome Statute towards the International Criminal Court? Will they actually begin meeting their international obligations under International Court of Justice rulings? These things are now being fiercely contested. And that is why I think the enormous mobilization of the past 2 years since the ceasefire needs to be not only maintained, but intensified and amplified, because the ceasefire, as important as it is only one box on the to-do list of addressing Palestinian rights, of removing the root causes of the crisis we are currently in, and of ensuring that this does not happen again.
Thank you so much for your time, Mouin.
Pleasure to be with you, and thank you for having me.